The moment I stepped into the courtroom, my son Ben Harlow let out a small laugh, the kind that trembles because it's hiding something. My daughter-in-law Olivia only shook her head like she was watching a sad little show she wished would end. Then the judge looked up. His face went pale, almost translucent under the courtroom lights. The gavel slipped from his hand, the sound sharp and brittle, as he whispered a name, one that no one else in that room had ever heard before. The ledger. And he was staring straight at me. My family thought they were about to lock up a confused old man, but they didn't know they had just declared war on a ghost. Like most family tragedies, it began with a single insult I should have let pass. My name is Edward Harlow, 68 years old, former forensic financial examiner for the IRS. And this is the story of how a father was betrayed and how justice finally learned to speak again. That morning, the Travis County Courthouse still smelled of new paint. Light poured in through the frosted glass windows, slicing the air into pale ribbons. My shoes clicked on the marble floor, echoing against the high ceiling, the rhythm of memory coming alive. On the defendant's bench, my son sat with his arms folded, a cool half-smile frozen on his lips. He didn't look at me. He lifted his chin instead, as if he were watching a play where he'd already written the ending. Next to him, Olivia sat stiff and small eyes locked on the table, her fingers woven tight together. The diamond on her ring caught the light and blinked nervously. Judge Raymond Ellison was at the bench reviewing the files. When he read my name, he stopped just long enough for me to notice, then nodded once. 20 years ago, we'd worked together on a federal tax fraud case. I saw the recognition flicker in his eyes, the kind that travels backward through decades. His hand trembled faintly when it touched the gavel. He didn't say the name, but I saw it behind his eyes. The ledger. The old nickname that once haunted men who thought numbers could hide their sins. My attorney, Claire Monroe, stood beside me. She was in her early 40s, compact frame, sharp voice, the kind that carried across a room without ever rising. She'd told me before the hearing, "Don't get angry. Just stay patient." I'd answered, "I've waited my whole life for the numbers to line up. One more hearing won't kill me." When Claire spoke, the room seemed to still. "We will show," she said, "that Mr. Harlow is fully competent, financially capable, and the victim of fiduciary abuse by his own family." The opposing lawyer smirked, tugging at his tie. I didn't listen to his rebuttal. My eyes stayed on Ben. He sat upright, light spilling across half his face. I remembered him at 10 years old, in my old office playing with the dusty computer, asking how I could remember every figure in a ledger. I told him. "Because I write them all down. Every father loves differently. Mine was through balance, through order, through never letting a number drift out of place. Now that same instinct for precision was being twisted into evidence against me." When the judge invited the petitioner to speak, Ben stood. His voice was steady, practiced, the tone of a man giving a quarterly report. "My father was once a brilliant man," he said. "No one denies that. But in the past 2 years, he's changed. He forgets appointments, misplaces payments, and signs documents he no longer understands. We're not trying to take his freedom. We're trying to protect him from himself." Each word fell like a pebble into still water, measured, rehearsed, and utterly cold. He spoke as if betrayal were an act of mercy. Olivia never looked up. Her lips trembled once, maybe guilt, maybe fear. Claire leaned toward me, whispering that everything so far was hearsay, no proof. I nodded. I'd spent a lifetime letting evidence speak. Ben's lawyer rose again, holding up a folder. "Medical evaluation," he said, confirming cognitive decline. Judge Ellison flipped through the pages. Claire motioned to see a copy. When she scanned it, her expression hardened. No license number, no clinic address, only a signature, Samuel Klein. She turned slightly toward me, her voice barely audible. "That's not a real doctor." I pressed my lips together. I knew that smell, the sour scent of a dirty trick wrapped in legality. Ben sat down, resting a hand on Olivia's shoulder, like a man performing comfort for an audience. I stared at that hand. I'd held it once when it was small enough to fit inside my palm, when I taught him how to tie his first shoelaces. I thought that hand would build something one day, not take it apart. Judge Ellison set the folder aside. "Mr. Harlow," he said, "do you wish to respond?" I rose slowly, my voice low but steady. "I'm not losing my mind." "Your Honor," I said, "I'm losing faith, and I'm here to get it back." He didn't answer, just wrote something down. Ben leaned back, lips curving in a half smile. He muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "You wouldn't understand, Dad. The world's changed." I looked at him. "Some things don't change, son. Numbers don't lie." He turned away satisfied, like a chess player who thinks the last move is already his. Olivia closed her eyes, exhaling quietly. The judge's gavel tapped once, a dry, measured sound, like the ticking of a clock running out. Claire stood requesting a recess to verify the medical records and the financial power of attorney Ben had submitted. The judge agreed. 15 minutes. Chairs scraped papers, shuffled, whispers filled the air. I stayed seated. I wanted to breathe this moment in the scent of polished oak deceit and family blood thickening in the same air. Ben walked past me, pausing close enough that I could feel his cologne, the expensive one I'd given him last year. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You should rest, Dad," he said. "We'll handle things from here." I didn't answer. My eyes stayed on the judge's bench where the gavel lay sideways, the light catching it like a thin blade. When he left, Olivia followed her steps, uneven, her eyes on the floor. Claire returned, asked softly if I was all right. "I'm fine," I told her. "I've dissected 100 fraud cases. This time the patient just happens to share my last name." The courtroom door closed behind her. The noise faded down the hall until all that was left was sunlight slicing through the window, painting thin golden lines across the wall. Above the bench, the bronze plaque glimmered. "In God we trust." I closed my eyes. In the darkness, I could see every number of my life falling back into place, neat, aligned, exact. No chaos. No imbalance. Even trust torn apart could be reconciled if you were willing to audit it line by line. And this time I would. Not for money, not for pride, but for the name Harlow, the only thing I ever kept perfectly clean. The wind off Lake Travis carried the dry scent of pine across the porch, and the June light was so bright the water looked like a sheet of blue glass. I woke early, brewed 2 cups of coffee, the same way I had every morning since 2018, and placed one, as always, by the framed photograph of Maggie on the corner of the table. After the funeral, I started a small fund in her name, the Maggie Harlow Foundation. I poured my federal pension and part of my 401k savings into it. It wasn't a large fund, but it was enough to sponsor a few fraud awareness workshops for seniors across Travis County, to hire volunteer lawyers who reviewed suspicious contracts for free. Every time I signed a transfer order, I felt like I was stitching a thread back to Maggie, one that kept me tethered to the better part of myself. I lived alone in the cabin we'd built decades earlier. Pine walls aged to the color of honey. A small kitchen on one side, a workroom on the other, with a long oak desk and shelves lined with old files. Above it hung a model boat I'd built for Ethan when he turned 10. That summer, Ben and Olivia came to Lake Travis often. They'd arrive in their polished SUV, groceries from H-E-B stacked in the back, pies, ribs, bottled lemonade. Olivia would set the table outside, smoothing the cloth, aligning the cutlery like we were dining at a restaurant in Frisco. Ben would head straight to the kitchen, open the fridge, lean against the counter, and tell me I should consider moving closer to Dallas. He said it would be good for me being near Ethan, that the boy had made the school's baseball team, that I'd have company. I listened, set down my cup, and told him I'd think about it. Over lunch, Olivia brought up taxes. She said the laws were getting more complicated, that electronic filings were a mess, that I shouldn't have to deal with all that anymore. She suggested I sign a limited financial power of attorney so Ben could handle my banking and tax matters. Her voice was calm, careful, the tone of someone trained to make complicated things sound reasonable. I looked at Ben. He nodded, said he'd help manage a few small investments, so my savings wouldn't sit idle in a low-yield account. "You taught me this, Dad," he said. "It's still the family business, just in a new form." I asked if it was complicated. He smiled. "Just a few signatures. I'll handle the rest." The folder looked ordinary, my name spelled correctly, the Lake Travis address exact. The boxes and fields were all familiar, the kind I'd seen 1,000 times before. There were annex pages, too, printed in fine, tight text. I'd spent my life reading fine print, but that afternoon I read like a man who trusted his own son. I signed where they pointed. Olivia gathered the pages, neatly slipped them into her leather case. Ben patted my shoulder and said I wouldn't have to worry about a thing. The weeks passed in the slow rhythm of a Texas summer. In the mornings I watered the lavender I'd planted at noon, I'd nap in the chair by the window, and by evening I'd row across the lake to the oak grove on the far side. Sometimes Ben would show up again, soda cans in hand, with another slim folder. He said the warehouse in East Austin was doing well, that if we upgraded the temperature monitoring system, we could land another client. I listened. For a moment, it felt like the old days, when ideas still sparked, when the clang of a metal hook against a beam sounded like progress. I believed, foolishly perhaps, that we were still speaking the same language. One humid evening at the end of July, when sunlight poured through the kitchen window like molten brass, Ben handed me another set of papers. He said the bank required updated online authorization forms, that charitable accounts needed a secondary contact for two-step verification. I asked if that was really necessary. He said yes, scammers are everywhere now. So I signed a few more spots. Olivia watched from the window, saying gently that if I came to stay in Dallas for a month, she'd prepare the guest room. Ethan would love it, she said. That weekend I drove up to Dallas, watched Ethan at baseball practice, then returned to Lake Travis with the smell of grass still clinging to my shirt and a photo of him grinning in the sun. The house waited in silence. Even the hinges on the porch door sighed when I opened them. I placed the photo in a frame and set it beside Maggie's. By early September, the air had turned dry and sharp. The lake shimmered under the heat like polished metal. I sat in my office, the window cracked open for a breath of lake air, and logged into the foundation's account, something I did as routinely as checking the fence after a storm. The login screen flickered, sent a code to my phone. I entered it. The balance appeared. It was lower than the amount in my ledger from the week before. I assumed it was a recent transfer for a class at the community center. But when I opened the transaction history, the page scrolled past familiar entries, small grants, rental fees, printing costs. And then one line stopped me cold. Transfer $120,000 to Reeves Subsidiary LLC. September 12th. Internal expense. I leaned forward, reading it again to make sure I hadn't misread. Reeves. The name was familiar. I knew Charlie Reeves, the CEO of Reeves Capital, an old friend in Houston, but the foundation had no dealings with any Reeves subsidiary. None. I scrolled further. No prior transactions matched. All the foundation's transfers were below 10,000. This one sat in the middle of the page like a stone in clear water. I printed the record. The printer hummed soft and sharp. The page slid out warm and light, but somehow heavy in my hand. I called the bank's helpline, keyed in the verification numbers weighted through the looped music. The representative confirmed the transaction had been executed through the new online authorization with two-step verification. I asked which authorization they meant. She read off a string of numbers that matched the date Ben had brought those updated forms. Sweat traced down my spine, though the air conditioner was steady. I pulled open the drawer, laid out the folders, and turned on the desk lamp. I read each page slowly. In the appendix, a single sentence caught my eye. Authorized parties may execute transfers between related entities when deemed beneficial to the shared interest. Legal phrasing, slick, harmless, and sharp as wire. I opened my ledger and compared last month's figures to the current balance. The difference was exact down to the cent. I thought of Ethan, how he'd told me he wanted to learn to read a balance sheet like his grandfather. I thought of Maggie, how she used to say, "Not every loss is theft. Sometimes we hand over the keys ourselves." I reached for my phone, found Claire Monroe's number, and sent her a message. "I need you to look into an irregular transaction. I'll send the scans tonight." While the scanner worked, I stood by the window. The lake was black under the moonlight, a single silver trail of light, breaking and reforming with every gust of wind. It looked like scattered numbers trying to piece themselves back into order. I closed my eyes, listening to my own heartbeat, keeping time with the night. When the files finished uploading, I sat down again, my hand resting on the wooden desk. The crickets outside stopped all at once, as if someone had flipped a switch. I looked over at Maggie's photograph. Her eyes were calm and clear, the same way they'd been the day we met in the college library when she asked why I loved numbers so much. I'd told her because they never betray. I wondered if that was still true. I switched off the desk lamp, leaving only the thin strip of porch light spilling in. Outside, the lake stretched out like an open ledger waiting for a new entry. Tomorrow I'd call Charlie. I'd meet Claire. And I'd ask my son the questions he'd never thought I'd dare to ask. The morning air over Lake Travis was so clear it mirrored even the faintest clouds like chalk dust scattered across the sky. I woke earlier than usual, cleared my desk, and slid the power of attorney papers into a separate envelope, sealing it with brown tape. On the front, I wrote by hand, Lake Travis, September 2022. I knew Claire would call soon, but before that, I needed time to look my son in the eye and see if he could still tell the truth. By mid-October, an invitation arrived, Ethan's 15th birthday. The party would be held at Ben and Olivia's new house just outside Frisco. Olivia had written a note at the bottom in careful script, "We hope you'll come. Ethan really wants to see you." I looked at that steady handwriting and remembered the first time she stepped into my home carrying a bouquet of lavender Maggie had grown. The drive north was smooth sunlight, soft over the interstate. The I-35 stretched ahead like a ledger-line, streetlights rising in neat rows on either side. The closer I got to Dallas, the taller the glass towers grew, reflecting the sun like mirrors that didn't want to let you look too long. Ben's house sat at the end of a paved cul-de-sac, gray roof tiles, white fences, a lawn so perfectly trimmed it looked measured. Balloons lined the porch railing, and from the backyard, the thump of music carried across the air. Ethan ran out first, his hand sticky with frosting, grinning wide. He hugged me quick and tight. I handed him a small box wrapped in blue paper. Inside was my old wristwatch, the one I wore during my years at the IRS. His eyes widened. "Are you sure, Grandpa?" I said. "Only a watch can teach you the worth of time." Dinner began early. The long table outside was covered in a white cloth lantern strung from the oak branches overhead. Olivia brought out honey-glazed ribs, the smell curling through the warm Texas dusk. She sat beside me, smiling bright, saying this house was just temporary. They were planning to build a larger one in Frisco. Her tone was light, practiced the way people talk when they want their success to sound like generosity. Ben chimed in, said they only wanted me to live comfortably, that once the new place was done I could stay for a few months. I said I was fine by the lake. The only thing I lacked there was conversation. Olivia took a sip of wine, her eyes gleaming. "You shouldn't live alone forever, Edward. We can take care of everything now. You've earned your rest." Ben set his glass down, the faintest edge in his voice. "Dad, you should let us handle the finances. Nobody writes checks anymore. Everything's automated safer." I cut a small piece of cake, looked straight at him and said, "Safe is the word people use right before they lose everything." He smirked. "You worry too much. I can manage risk." Around the table, his friends, young investors, real estate partners, talked over each other about stock gains and development projects north of the city. Their laughter sounded hollow, like it was bouncing off marble. I stayed quiet, sipping water. Across the table, Ethan's eyes moved between his father and me, curious, uncertain, caught between pride and discomfort. I thought of Maggie, of the dinners where she'd tell Ben stories about decency and hard work, when the table was still a place for kindness. Without thinking, I said aloud that she would have loved to see Ethan now. The air shifted. Olivia's eyes flicked sideways, her lips tightening. "We should focus on the future," she said softly, "not live in the past." Ben nodded, changing the subject to construction permits and market timing. I set my glass down. The surface of the table was cold under my palm. In that moment, I realized they didn't just want me to move on. They wanted me to forget not only Maggie, but everything I had built. After dinner, the guests left one by one. Olivia gathered dishes, Ethan saw his friends out. I was about to say goodbye when Ben offered me a drink. "Just one, Dad." We went into his study, a new room smelling of oak and ambition. A large monitor glowed faintly on the desk. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, set one in front of me. The amber light rippled across a pile of documents. My eyes caught a folder left open at the center of the desk. Edward Harlow, Power of Attorney. For a moment, the world went very still. My signature sat in the corner, clean and perfect, but too perfect. A scanned imitation, rigid and cold. Ben saw the way I was looking. "It's just paperwork, Dad," he said evenly. "You already signed it, just an electronic update." I kept my eyes on him. My voice was quiet. "What's this version for?" He shrugged. "Financial management. Nothing else." I sat back, the glass cool in my hand. The lamplight glared off the paper, turning the ink a faint gray. "Did Olivia know about this?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "She handled the documents. I just signed what the lawyer sent." I said, "You should be careful with what you sign. A signature's the one thing you can't take back." He paused, then chuckled. "You're old-fashioned, Dad. These days it's all digital. Easier that way." I said nothing. I remembered the look in his eyes the first time he testified beside me in court 15 years ago, admiration, trust. That look was gone now, replaced by something smoother. Confidence sharpened by entitlement. Olivia knocked on the door, asked if we needed more ice. Ben told her no. When she left, I said I had some business in Austin to take care of, that I wouldn't be visiting Dallas again soon. He only nodded, face blank. I stood scanning the room photos of Ethan Ben's awards framed neatly on the wall shelves lined with real estate manuals and glossy financial magazines. Everything was in order. Too much order. The kind that hides something. In the hallway, I passed the kitchen. Olivia was on the phone, voice low but clear. She was talking about transferring funds to Reeves, mentioning an internal account. When she noticed me, her tone shifted mid-sentence. She smiled. "Good night, Edward." Driving back to the hotel, the car headlights swept over billboards glowing along the interstate. The radio played an old John Denver song, the melody thin and steady under the hum of tires on asphalt. I thought about the file on his desk, the bold letters "Power of Attorney," and Ben's voice saying, "You already signed it." I thought about the $120,000 transfer to Reeves' subsidiary LLC and Olivia's words on the phone. The pieces were aligning quietly, ruthlessly. At a red light, I looked in the rearview mirror. The headlights behind me cast my face in white and shadow. Tired, older, but steady. The game had begun. Only this time, the numbers weren't confined to ledgers and reports. They were written in bloodlines. When I reached the hotel, I turned off the engine and sat still for a moment. Dallas was silent, as if the whole city were holding its breath. In that silence, I heard Maggie's voice in my head, soft, certain, telling me that some debts can't be paid with money. I walked into the lobby, took my key, and rode the elevator up. The corridor was empty, the air faintly scented with detergent and distance. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and closed it gently behind me. The sound it made was small, final, and perfectly balanced. Morning in Austin was colder than usual, the kind of cold that clung to the wooden railings of the porch, like memory. 3 months had passed since that dinner in Dallas, and the surface of Lake Travis had changed color slowly, like the slow turning of old ledger pages. I brewed coffee, stepped out to the mailbox, and stood still when I saw the white envelope stamped with the seal of the Travis County Probate Court. The paper inside felt lighter than it looked yet. When I tore open the seal, a different kind of weight hit the floor. The first line read, "Petition for conservatorship, filed by Benjamin Harlow." It requested that the court assign a guardian to manage my finances, because my son claimed I was no longer capable of doing it myself. I had once watched people lose their homes to a single pull of a trigger in a dark alley. I never imagined my undoing would come printed in black ink, carried by the weight of a familiar signature. I laid the papers flat on my desk, wiped the surface with a clean cloth, as if preparing for surgery. The letters on the page were calm, almost polite, and utterly merciless. I called an old attorney friend, the one who'd helped me settle a contractor dispute years ago. His voice was the same as I remembered, slow, measured, unshaken. I gave him the case number, asked him to verify the legal status of the power of attorney documents in question. He said he'd get back to me soon. I set the phone down and looked out the window. The lake was still. Even the wind seemed to be listening. Less than 2 hours later, the phone rang. He'd found it. The power of attorney under my name had been notarized, sealed, verified, all signatures consistent with the digital records on file. Everything was legitimate. I thanked him, hung up, and placed the phone face down on the desk, as though closing a ledger. But in my head, the numbers began to separate columns, forming questions, rising. I opened the cabinet that held my old black binders, pulled out the one labeled Family Records. Inside were all my previous powers of attorney copies from a decade ago, the minor updates I'd made whenever I switched banks. I spread the pages under the lamplight and put on my glasses. My signature had a tell. Always had. The last stroke of Harlow lifted slightly, like a small hook, a habit I developed after a bout of illness years back, when my hands still trembled. I traced the line with a pencil, feeling the faint indent where the pen once pressed the paper. The new signature, the one Ben had filed that summer, had no indentation. The ink sat too cleanly on the surface, as if printed from another sheet and pressed here. The angle of the H was perfect, symmetrical, too symmetrical. The real one had a brief hesitation in the middle stroke the moment my hand paused whenever a bird chirped outside my window. I reached for a magnifying glass. Under the lens I saw it, the tiniest flaw missing. On my old papers, the tail of the W carried a thin excess of ink, the trace of a gel pen that bled in summer heat. The new one was sterile, crisp, the precision of thermal print. I placed the two side by side, laid a ruler across the invisible guideline I knew by memory. The newer signature followed a flawless slope, machine steady. The old one wavered, the human kind of imperfection. Whoever prepared the new file knew exactly how to step around suspicion. They understood procedure submission sequences and the power of a clean notary seal, how it could turn a forgery into an official truth. By noon, sunlight had grown harsh across the lake. I watered the philodendron in the corner, letting the sound of the stream drown out the feeling that the house had somehow shrunk. Then I called the bank branch in Bee Cave. They sent me a secure link with the foundation's recent transactions. Scrolling through, I paused at a cluster of vague entries marked internal adjustment, all properly authenticated. That meant no one had broken in. The thief had used a key and walked straight through the front door. I drove to the notary office listed on the filing, a small place, beige walls covered in framed certificates. The air smelled of toner and cheap perfume. A middle-aged woman asked what I needed. I handed her the reference number. She typed it in, printed a stamped copy, and slid it across the counter. The notary name read Sandoval. The date matched exactly when Ben had told me we were just updating digital forms. I thanked her, walked out, and sat in my car for a long minute. I felt like I was standing inside a vast warehouse surrounded by sealed containers, holding in my hand the one piece of paper that proved everything inside had already changed. On the way back to Lake Travis, I stopped at an office supply store, bought highlighters, graph paper, a stronger magnifier. Some battles need no weapons, only enough light to expose the edges. At home, I laid the notarized copy on the left, the old one on the right, marking differences with color. Yellow for lines too perfect, blue for strokes without depth, pink for angles too precise. The colors lay still across the desk, tiny flags staking ground in a silent war. My phone buzzed. A message from the old lawyer. He'd reviewed everything. If the document was properly notarized, the court would accept it as valid unless I could produce contradictory evidence. He advised me to schedule an independent cognitive evaluation to counter the claim of diminished capacity. I texted back briefly, "I'll do it." But that's not the heart of it. The truth wasn't in my mind, it was in the ink. Someone had built a lie on a legally perfect foundation. To dismantle it, I needed to follow the ink to the pen that drew it. By late afternoon, wind picked up. Clouds rolled in from the west, thick and low. I shut the windows, fastened. The latch turned on the kitchen light. On the table, I laid out another folder, one containing the company names from the foundation's bank statement. Reeves Subsidiary, LLC. It sat in the middle of the page like a black stone on a white chessboard. I turned on the computer, searching through the Delaware and Texas business registries, cross-referencing addresses, agents of record filing dates. One by one, empty boxes filled with names, connections, patterns. Rain came down suddenly, drumming against the roof, shaking the house in waves. I felt calm. The kind of calm that comes after you stop denying the storm. Years ago, when I worked for the IRS, I learned something simple: truth never runs. It waits, always, for someone patient enough to walk toward it. I gathered the papers, aligned them neatly, clipped them into a binder labeled The Spine. My hand lingered on the notarized copy for a long moment, the way you'd look at a witness who refuses to talk but knows everything. I dialed, and the ringtone pulsed through the quiet room until Claire's voice came on, clean-clipped, sharp, as a blade fresh from the whetstone. I told her I needed to meet. She said, "This afternoon." The drive into downtown Austin was busy, sunlight breaking through the post-rain haze and turning every sign brighter than usual. Her office sat inside a red brick building near Barton Springs, a small plaque by the door reading Elder Asset Protection and Estate Law. Claire stepped out from her inner room, her hair tied back, her gray eyes scanning everything with the precision of a scanner beam. We shook hands. She motioned to the chair across from her desk and asked for all the documents. I laid them out, in order: the court petition, the notarized copy, the updated powers of attorney, and the foundation statements. She didn't rush. Each page stayed under her gaze for a measured beat long enough for her eyes to map every margin and spacing. When she reached the notarized copy, she adjusted the lamp, tilted her head slightly, and let the light sweep along the ink line. Her expression didn't change until she set the magnifier down and turned the page once more. Then she said quietly that the signature wasn't alive. It was an ink impression, likely printed or captured digitally before being converted to hard copy. The ink was too clean at every stop point, the lines too uniform. A notary could have missed it, she added. Remote witnessing's still accepted in some counties since the pandemic. This would pass without question. I asked what you'd call something like this. She looked at me. Professional forgery, she said. Not amateur. And they used your trust as their template. She asked about my recent contact with Ben and Olivia. I told her about the birthday dinner in Dallas, Olivia's talk about the future, the open folder on Ben's desk. Claire jotted brief notes, her pen strokes firm, deliberate. This isn't only about proving your competence, she said. It's about tracing motive. Whoever built this needed liquidity and fast. No one risks this much precision unless they're desperate. I leaned back the reflection from her desk lamp, casting a sterile glow over the glass surface. One name surfaced in my mind, printed bold like a heading on a report. Charlie Reeves. I told her Charlie was an old friend from Houston, founder of Reeves Capital, and that Ben had once boasted about a revolving credit line Charlie approved for his warehouse projects near Dallas. I hadn't followed up since. Claire leaned forward. Can you call him on speaker? I nodded, found his number pressed. Call. On the third ring, Charlie answered. His voice was still bright, confident, but underneath it was a tautness I recognized from men who'd stood too close to banks when the doors were about to close. I skipped the small talk, told him I needed to know about Ben's accounts with Reeves Capital, that I wasn't calling as a father, but as a man trying to protect himself. Silence for a beat. Then he exhaled. Are you in a safe place right now? I looked at Claire. She nodded, motioning to put him on speaker. Charlie got straight to it. Ben owed Reeves Capital $2.8 million under a revolving credit agreement for 2 warehouse developments in Collin and Denton counties. He was 2 interest payments behind and had requested an extension through the third quarter. But his cash flow sheet doesn't hold, Charlie said. If he doesn't post new collateral, the cross-default clause triggers. That means we don't just seize the project land, we go after any assets tied to related entities. The chill started at the base of my neck and spread down my back, slow as the hum of a freezer door opening behind me. Charlie paused, his tone softening. I'm telling you this out of respect. Everything I said can be verified through counsel. Claire raised a hand, signaling for me to stay quiet. She spoke calm and direct, asking him to confirm the delinquency and the repossession clause in writing. Charlie agreed, said he'd send an official email that day, though he couldn't disclose more beyond legal limits. When the call ended, the office fell back into stillness. Only the faint tap of Claire's pen against the folder broke it. She looked up. Now we have motive. What's left is proof. Her voice was even steady. We'll move on 3 tracks. First, handwriting and ink forensics court-certified, comparing your genuine signatures across years to the filed version, focusing on ink saturation and pressure depth. Second, procedural tracing. The notary chain, the IP address of the remote filing, and who scheduled the appointment. If your credentials were used off-device, that's our breach. Third, the money trail, every transfer from the Maggie Foundation into Ben-linked entities, especially internal disbursements mentioning Reeves or its subsidiaries. I asked how long it would take. She said evidence gathering could move fast if the court granted discovery orders, but signature analysis would take a few weeks. What matters, she added, is that you don't confront Ben yet. Give them no chance to clean their tracks. She handed me a checklist: bank statements, authentication emails, transaction receipts. Start tonight. Before sunset, if you can. Then she asked if I remembered the first time Olivia brought up the power of attorney discussion. I closed my eyes. The smell of honey-glazed ribs drifted back the scrape of a chair on the patio floor. Late June, I said. The weekend after Ethan made the summer baseball team. She wrote the date down, then asked me to repeat Ben's exact words. I said, "He told me no one writes checks anymore. Everything's safer online." Claire laughed once softly. Not amusement recognition. That line's practically the national anthem of financial exploitation, she said. My phone buzzed. Charlie's email arrived. Claire opened it on the big screen, reading aloud. It confirmed the loan amount, the third quarter deadline, the cross-default clause, and ended with a polite line offering cooperation should the borrower provide new collateral. She printed it, clipped it into the section labeled Financial Motive. She looked at me again. Now you know why the Maggie Foundation lost 6 figures. Why they needed that clean power of attorney. Why they built the cognitive decline narrative. They needed money fast, legal on paper, invisible to scrutiny. And if they made you legally incompetent, every signature under Ben's authority would stand unchallenged. My throat felt dry. I asked for water. Claire poured a glass, slid it across the desk. Pain's real, she said. But in our work, pain has to learn procedure. Next step, we'll file an emergency petition. Ask the court to freeze the authority, preserve the foundation's assets until forensic results come in. No direct contact with Ben or Olivia about the case. Everything goes through counsel. Understand, I nodded. I understood too well. Some conversations heal, others only expose openings. Before I left, I told her I'd drive back to Lake Travis, dig through every drawer photograph, every receipt, gather every scrap that could build a bridge strong enough to hold the truth. She walked me to the door, reminding me to note even the smallest detail, an offhand comment, a misplaced date. Cases are won on crumbs, she said. Outside, the sky had turned the color of rusted copper. The air smelled of wet leaves from the park nearby. I stood at the curb for a moment, watching the cars slide past, like lines of text across a screen, each one a private story sealed behind glass. In my coat pocket, the printed email pressed against my palm, cool and rigid like a key waiting for a lock. I walked toward the car, hand steady on the handle, started the engine, and watched the fuel needle rise past full. It felt like a small, quiet confirmation, enough left for a long drive home. Night fell fast on the road from Austin back to Lake Travis. When I got home, I hung my coat by the door, turned on the desk lamp, and set the folder squarely at the center of the table like a surgeon laying out a file before the first incision. I powered up the computer, opened the banking portal, and expanded the transaction logs to full screen. The numbers stood in columns, tall and silent, like marble pillars in an old courthouse. I scrolled slowly, pausing at each date, tracing how the money left moving through the cold names of legal entities that hid human hands behind them. By morning, Claire arrived, tablet under one arm, portable drive in her bag, a neat stack of clipped documents in her hand. We sat across from each other, the table already mapped with highlighter lines, connecting bank statements to corporate registries. She said we'd start by aligning each withdrawal with what Ben had recently bragged about. I searched my email archives, found his messages about Reeves Realty Group, a development company up north near Dallas. I remembered the day he'd driven me to Frisco, showing off an empty plot of land, saying he'd build an automated storage center there, just like what you used to dream of, Dad. The timestamps matched perfectly with the large transfers from Maggie's foundation and one of my secondary accounts. I printed 2 statements, June through October. Yellow ink for withdrawals from the foundation, blue for transfers from my reserve account, the one only I should have touched. Claire pulled up the Delaware and Texas business registries, typing quickly. The name Reeves Subsidiary LLC appeared with a Plano P.O. box and a registered agent's address. She ordered the full filing record. When the PDF loaded, she flipped through to the financial appendix. In the bottom corner, faint as a watermark, one line of text listed the secondary account contact, Olivia Harlow, joint holder. The room went still. Claire turned up the lamp. Joint ownership, she said. That's not subcontracting, that's control. I cross-checked the Reeves transfers against Charlie's email. Every withdrawal from the foundation aligned exactly with Ben's missed interest payments. I wrote one word in the margin: emergency. Claire began drafting a discovery list for the bank, 2-factor authentication logs, IP addresses, used on the day of the updated power of attorney, and any video or audio from remote notarization. She told me to capture every screen, every timestamp, every metadata string. I followed step by step, my hands steadying, now that they had something to do. I pulled up the SMS verification logs and took screenshots. One code was sent to a device ending in numbers that didn't match my phone mid-July. Claire drew a red line beside it. That's our hook, she said. We'll use it to freeze the authorization. By noon, I felt that old exhaustion, the one that comes from tracing numbers for hours. I got up for water, looked out through the glass. The lake lay flat, a fishing boat gliding across its wake, a single silver thread. Behind me, Claire kept writing, the pen sliding across the page in the rhythm of thought. She told me to take 10 minutes. She'd call a digital forensics contact. Outside on the porch, the air smelled of cedar and distant rain. My phone buzzed in my pocket, an email subject line in lowercase for Grandpa. Sender Ethan. No greeting, just a single sentence: I think you need to hear this. And below it, a single audio file. My heart stuttered once, then settled into something cold and deliberate. I called into the house, told Claire that Ethan had sent a file. She came to the desk, said to play it on the small speaker, and note the timestamp. I pressed play. First came ambient sound. The dishwasher footsteps on hardwood. Then Ben's voice, low and tight, the kind of tone men use when they think the walls can keep a secret. If he finds out, we lose everything. A pause. Olivia's voice next, softer but close. I can handle it. You just need to re-sign the update. Ben again. I already did. But if Claire Monroe gets involved and the court freezes the order, 1 day's delay kills us. Olivia, no delay. Just finish transferring the rest from the charity fund to Reeves. The rest is already in the sub-account. A sharp knock, his hand hitting the table. The sound echoed through wood. Then his voice final and flat. If he dies or gets declared incompetent, we're in the clear. I didn't feel anger or shock. Just a deep frozen quiet like dry ice spreading across my mind. Claire's hand rested on the desk edge, her eyes locked on the waveform on screen. She whispered, "That's our anchor." I replayed it, noted the file's creation time format and duration. In the background, you could hear Ethan's breath barely there, the soft tremor of a boy hiding near a doorway. I pictured him standing just beyond the kitchen, the phone pressed against his chest, his heart pounding like a startled deer's against autumn leaves. My throat burned, but my voice stayed even. "He chose the side of truth," I said. Claire nodded. "Then it's our job to keep him out of harm's way." She told me to back up the file immediately, 2 copies, one encrypted, one on her drive. "Don't rename it," she said. "Don't edit or trim. The original must stay untouched." I did as she said. The progress bar crept forward, a thin blue vein crawling across the screen. While it ran, Claire called her contact, speaking in short sentences. She arranged for them to collect the copy that evening to create a hash verification. When it was done, I sat still, fingers resting on the wood grain. Everything I'd guessed was now linear. No misunderstanding left to hide behind. Only intent. I thought of Ethan, of his 15th birthday, of the old watch I'd placed in his hand. How the minute hand had probably made a full circle during the time it took 2 adults to talk about an old man's death as if it were an investment strategy. Claire refocused. She outlined our next steps: an emergency petition to freeze the charity accounts and Olivia's joint holdings, and a court order compelling Reeves' subsidiary to produce access logs, co-owner lists, and recent transaction records. I asked about Reeves' Realty Group. She said she'd already drafted a request to their payment processor, linking it with Charlie's email to establish motive. Then another vibration in my pocket. Ethan again. This time, one more line: "I'm in my room. I'm okay. Don't call right now." I replied with 2 words. "Got it." Claire said we needed to protect him by pretending we didn't have the recording, at least until the court ordered data preservation for the opposing side's devices and cloud accounts. I agreed. Some cards only gain value when they stay face down long enough. The afternoon passed in a map of colored arrows. I drew double lines connecting Reeves' subsidiary to Maggie's foundation. Dashed lines from Reeves' Realty to the debt schedule in Charlie's email. Claire labeled each matched transaction aloud as I typed the timestamps into the ledger. My body found a rhythm again, the same focus I'd once felt on warehouse floors at midnight, counting inventory by flashlight. Each number a crate. Each statement a manifest. Each signature a seal. The last of the sunlight slanted across the room, catching the framed photo of Maggie. Her smile glowed faintly, the way it had that first summer afternoon in Boston, when I'd met her eyes and known peace. I told Claire I wasn't surprised by what Ben said, that I'd long wondered if the man sitting in that room was still my son or someone else entirely. She didn't comfort me. She simply said, "In court, we don't prove love, we prove truth." Dusk deepened. Claire packed her copies, checked the action list once more. She said she'd file the emergency motion before the clerk's office closed. I walked her to the door, watched her car pull away down the quiet road. The wind off the lake smelled of resin and damp stone. In my coat pocket, the phone felt heavy with what only 2 people in the world now knew existed. I went back inside, locked the door, returned to the desk, and laid both hands over the folder, like closing a book to keep its pages from scattering. The house was silent. I played the file one last time, volume low. At the end, after the scrape of a chair and the faint clatter of dishes, came a whisper. Ethan's voice steady and small. "I'm on your side, Grandpa." Night at Lake Travis was smooth as glass. I wrote 2 words, footprints, then closed the notebook, my mind already counting backward through tomorrow's tasks. The phone buzzed softly on the desk. Claire's name lit the screen, emergency preservation order filed. I texted back that I'd received it, that more evidence was on the way. Before I could put the phone down, headlights swept across the window, a pale arc sliding along the ceiling, and stopping just before the porch. 3 short knocks, firm, decisive. When I opened the door, a man stood there in a coarse canvas jacket, eyes sharp in the way of someone who hadn't slept through many nights. He introduced himself, Harold Bennett, retired police detective, now security consultant in Dallas. Said he lived near Ben, that he'd heard about my situation, and that what he had couldn't wait. In his hand was a small USB drive sealed in a clear zip bag. "Pulled this from a building across from your son's office," he said. "You'll want to see it." I invited him in, set a kettle on the stove, motioned to a chair. Harold spoke in that steady tone of men who've seen too much to waste energy on outrage. He'd been doing maintenance the night before on a camera system across from Reeves Realty Group's offices. Wind, light rain, the kind of night no one lingers outside. Yet the parking lot lights were on. 2 men were moving in and out carrying server racks. Then Ben appeared. "Office should have been closed," Harold said. So I zoomed in, recorded everything. This morning, reviewing the feed, he realized what it was: data destruction. I plugged in the drive. Folders appeared, each file stamped with exact time and date. The first frame showed a rain-slick parking lot glowing under pale sodium light. 2 men in baseball caps wheeled a server tray toward a van. Their lanyards swung in the air. I paused, the frame zoomed in. The lettering was faint but clear enough. RG. Harold leaned closer, pointing to a faint blue flicker in the lower left. "See that light?" he said. "That's a live drive indicator. When you power down properly, it blinks in sequence. That one's erratic. Forced shutdown." I hit play. Another figure stepped into frame. The gait familiar enough to stop my breath halfway. Ben. Dark jacket, gloves, baseball cap pulled low. He moved fast to the cart, looked around once and yanked the cord from the back. The light went dead. The timestamp read 3:42 a.m. Harold kept talking, calm, methodical. 5 minutes later in the video, Ben and the 2 men wheeled the server to an industrial dumpster behind the building. They lifted the lid, dumped the drives in metal, clattering against metal. Ben hesitated just long enough to look down into the black hollow below, as if staring into a well that would never echo back. Then he slammed the lid shut. Rain streaked the lens, turning the lights into trembling halos. I replayed the moment where he pulled the cable. The body of the machine shuddered. The light vanished, snuffed out like a cigarette. I could almost smell the burnt resin of drives I'd once watched melt under forensic heat decades ago, back when I was chasing fraud rings through logistics companies and late-night server rooms. People always think deleting hardware erases truth. They forget data travels with footprints in more places than they imagine. Harold took another envelope from his jacket. Inside were verification prints, hash certificates, timestamp logs cross-checked with the camera's internal clock and the national NTP reference. All synced within seconds, he said. "Everything holds." I looked at him. In his eyes was the discipline of someone who'd kept his oath even after the badge was gone. I asked why he'd driven all the way out here instead of turning it over in Dallas. He said he didn't trust anyone near Ben's office. Too many clean hands, he muttered. I've seen what it looks like when fraud dresses up as procedure. He told me not to mourn the machines in the footage. What matters isn't in the metal. I nodded, thanked him, offered dinner. He declined. Need to check more cameras around that block before the footage rolls over. If I find anything else, I'll call. When the door closed, silence filled the house again. Rain tapped the roof in slow rhythm. I called Claire, told her what we had video of Ben destroying servers at dawn, complete with timestamps and verified hash codes. Her voice came firm through the speaker. Keep the USB sealed. Log everything, time received, source, name, address. Store it in the safe. I'll file an emergency motion to secure the site and freeze sanitation service around that dumpster. Send me a digital copy through our encrypted channel. I followed each step, one by one. Every task felt like tightening another mooring line, keeping a vessel from drifting off into the current. I locked the safe, wrote a short note in my ledger, Dallas video evidence, 11:47 p.m. from Harold Bennett. Then I sat again before the monitor and replayed the footage. This time I watched Ben's shoulders, the way they drew inward when he yanked the cord. Not fear, not regret. Something emptier, a pause where a question should have lived. I opened a text window typed to Ethan. You okay? A minute later, his reply appeared, I'm okay, nothing more. Sometimes silence keeps a thread from snapping. Near midnight, the rain eased into stray drops. I brewed tea, the scent faintly bitter and grounding. Then I drew a new map on a clean page. One branch, Ethan, audio file. Another Harold, dumpster video. A third, Charlie, lone email. At the center, motive. From that circle, 3 lines stretched, one to Maggie's foundation, one to Reeves' subsidiary, one to the forged power of attorney. The lines converged like the closing jaws of a trap. I poured tea, the steam fogging the glass. Thought of Ben as a boy sitting beside me at the old desk, learning how to read balance sheets. He once said a line I'd kept like an old coin in my pocket. Data doesn't lie. When numbers don't match, it's because someone's hands are in them. I looked back at the paused frame, Ben's face lit by the faint reflection of the dumpster lid. Data doesn't lie, I whispered. And now it'll prove it. My phone lit again. Claire's message, court acknowledged. Scene preservation request sent. Building management notified to secure footage and keycard logs. We meet in Dallas tomorrow morning. Bring copies. Harold will provide witness affidavit. I turned off the stove, stacked the cups, half drew the curtain. In the half-dark, Maggie's photo caught a thin glint of light, like a silver thread pulled tight. I placed my palms on the desk, feeling the wood grain steady under my hands. The road ahead had just gained another marker. Somewhere across the city, someone probably thought they'd thrown truth into the dark. But here, the dark had already memorized their faces. I took one long breath, shut down the screen, and let the house fold back into its small, waiting sleep before dawn. Dawn crept through the pines, thin mist still dusting the lake like powdered glass. I ate half a piece of bread, slipped Harold's USB into the safe, grabbed the case file, and drove straight toward Dallas. The I-35 opened ahead of me, lanes flowing, steady green highway signs flashing past, like ledger lines on a balanced sheet. Claire had arranged to meet in Uptown. Reeves' Capital's office sat high above the city glass walls, catching the sun like a frozen block of light. The lobby was quiet. A receptionist led us into a small conference room overlooking North Lamar traffic moving below like a stream of shifting numbers. Charlie Reeves walked in broad-shouldered, clean suit, the presence of a man who keeps discipline in his blood. His handshake was firm, his eyes stopping on mine for a beat, as if weighing the cost of what I'd come to do. He said Ben's $2.8 million loan was approaching its call date, the renewal terms were weak, and he could sell me the note outright if I wanted. Claire leaned slightly back, pen rolling between her fingers, before she stilled it. She reminded me that buying the debt would mean drawing from my retirement reserve, placing the quiet margin of old age on the table where family had already blurred the lines. I met Charlie's gaze and said I wasn't buying debt. I was buying truth. Something in his face shifted tension, softening like someone recognizing the weight of what couldn't be said aloud. He opened his briefcase and slid across a summary sheet, principal accrued, penalties, cross-default clauses, collateral land in Collin County interests in Reeves' subsidiary, and receivables from several commercial leases. The transfer includes everything rights and obligations, he said. Claire asked to see the notice clause and the UCC filing protocol for assignment, pressing him on any restriction if the borrower's control changed. Charlie's answer was crisp. All framed under UCC attachment. File the notice record with the Secretary of State and it tracks automatically. I turned each page slowly, the way a doctor feels for a pulse he already knows is fading. The numbers matched Charlie's earlier email. The call date fell exactly between the day Ethan sent me the audio and the night Ben threw the servers away. The lines in my mind closed into a perfect circle. Claire took notes, photographing several sections. She reminded me again that the transfer should shoot through an independent entity, something beyond personal reach. I told her Harlow Trust LLC had existed since Maggie's time, built to manage property interests, clean books, transparent holdings. It could bear the weight. Charlie nodded. He produced a draft assignment, simple, precise. The price principal plus interest to date with the transfer fee waived. I asked why waive it. He smiled faintly. Some fees make you poorer when you collect them. I understood. Poverty isn't always about the balance. Sometimes it's about the reflection. We turned to the payment structure. Claire suggested escrow-neutral agent holding both money and documents simultaneous release. Charlie agreed without hesitation. 2 copies of the contract arrived. I called the bank, confirmed Harlow Trust's available balance, authorized a transfer up to the full amount. The banker asked for purpose of transaction. Asset acquisition, I said. She read the protocol, requested 2-factor verification. When I hung up, the breath I'd been holding stayed anchored somewhere deep, like ballast under a still ship. Charlie leaned back and told a story about the mistake that almost put him behind bars years ago, and the man who cleared his name by proving the numbers weren't as dirty as they looked. This note's trash to people chasing speed, he said, but it's a tool for someone chasing right. Then he looked at me. Once you sign, you can demand audits, disclosures, full preservation of assets. And if they fail, you hold the right to seize. You ready to carry that kind of pressure, I said. It's lighter than watching a name you built get dragged through mud. Claire slid a short internal authorization across the table, empowering her to sign for Harlow Trust LLC, file the UCC, and send notice to the debtor. The language was tight, valid only for this transaction. I signed. The pen made a dry, decisive sound. She countersigned, time-stamped it, and clipped it to the file. Escrow setup was fast. The intermediary confirmed receipt, waiting for funds. I double-checked the routing numbers, entered the code from my phone, repeated the last 2 digits aloud for confirmation. When it was done, my palm felt warm, not from fear, but from blood moving faster than usual. While we waited for transfer confirmation, Charlie stared out the window. Dallas sunlight broke across the street, throwing long shadows from the light poles. Some people are born to borrow, he said. Some to lend. but a few, just a few, learn to use a debt to tell the truth. I didn't answer. I thought of Maggie the night she sat beside me when I left the IRS to teach part-time. She'd said truth needed a home like anything else. Sometimes that home was a decision made without flinching. The escrow email came through. Funds received. Transfer executed. I heard Claire exhale a rare human sound from someone built of composure. Charlie extended his hand. "From now on," he said, "Ben answers to you." I shook it, thanked him for keeping the line clean. He smiled. "You just did what debtors call ruthless. But if they ever read their own contracts, they'd see ruthlessness was there the whole time." Claire drafted a notice to Ben's attorney. Creditor assignment completed. All future correspondence to Harlow Trust, LLC. She added a request for full accounting from Reeves' subsidiary tenant contracts, interest adjustments, 6-month transaction logs, and filed a copy with the Secretary of State's registry. Watching her work felt like walking through a hallway where every light clicked on in sequence. We left Reeves' Capital as the sun tipped over the glass roof of the opposite building. Charlie walked us to the elevator. "If you need certified copies, I'll send them before end of day," he said. Then paused, eyes steady on me. "Some lessons," he added, "only make sense when you've stood on both sides of a debt." The doors slid closed. His voice and the scent of polished wood stayed behind. In the parking lot, Dallas heat wrapped around me like a heavy towel. I sat in the car watching the skyline mirrored across the windshields around me. Claire balanced the file on her knees, checking and rechecking the UCC filings and tomorrow's meeting with the court clerk for the industrial site injunction. She looked over and asked quietly if I regretted spending retirement money. I told her some things when weighed make money lose its gravity. The highway back was crowded but fluid, 2 streams of headlights and taillights flowing in opposite directions, never colliding. I thought of Ethan, of his faint breathing, in the recording of the whisper that he was on my side. I thought of Ben, of the look he gave the dumpster before he closed it, and the line he once told me, "Data doesn't lie." Now the data would speak, and it would speak to the right person. Past Georgetown, my phone vibrated. Final escrow confirmation. Transfer complete. Harlow Trust, LLC is now the creditor of record. Claire closed her laptop, leaned back, and said, "From this moment, we're not outside Ben's story anymore. We're in the center of it, right where truth stands." I tightened my grip on the wheel. The sun dropped lower Washington, Texas in a thick, honey-colored light. Through the windshield, the world looked like a clean sheet of paper, and on that page, the words finally aligned. I hadn't bought a debt. I'd bought back the right to call things by their real names. The sign for Lake Travis appeared ahead. I changed lanes, feeling the calm of a number finally finding its box order restored, waiting for the next line of the story to begin. Morning in Austin came clear and sharp sunlight spilling across the desk, stacked with neat folders. At 7:13, Claire called. Her voice was clipped alert, the sound of someone already halfway through a long day. She said the subpoenas were ready, one for Dr. Stephen Keller, one for the banks tied to Olivia, and another for the email provider, both she and Ben used. I could hear the rhythm of typing on her end, the measured percussion of control. Seconds later, a secure message pinged with the filing receipt attached. She reminded me to dig up any signature samples and recent dental receipts. Even the smallest invoice, she said, can open a big door. I found one in a drawer, an old cleaning bill from a clinic across town, and smiled at the absurd precision of justice, how something so trivial might turn out to matter. By noon, the court clerk confirmed the subpoenas were served. Each went out on its own trail, one to Olivia's bank, one to Keller's shell company, Ace Healthcare Consulting, and another to their email provider. Claire dispatched them through official channels requesting data preservation and immediate suspension of auto-deletion. I sat before the screen, watching emails leave like small boats sliding out of harbor, each carrying a piece of truth toward open water. 2 days later, the first boat came back. The bank responded with stamped digital statements and a certification of origin. Line 5 on the first page stopped me cold, a $20,000 transfer to Ace Healthcare Consulting. The memo field read simply, consulting fee. The date fell exactly 1 week after the Dallas dinner and 2 weeks before the updated power of attorney. Below it, the initiator Olivia Harlow from the couple's home IP address in North Dallas. I drew a red line beneath the entry. It felt like hearing a lock click open on a door I'd already suspected was there. That afternoon, the email provider's response arrived large file encrypted. Claire and I opened it simultaneously from separate systems, cross-referencing message counts and headers. The subjects were clinical, stripped of emotion, assessment report draft, schedule confirmation, behavioral summary. Thread after thread revealed Keller replying like clockwork to Olivia's prompts. In one chain, she listed minor symptoms, forgetting appointments, driving slower, leaving keys on the counter. I read them as one might read a fictional case study of oneself, detached, faintly amused, and quietly chilled by its precision. Then came the message that froze the room. Buried midway through a reply chain, 2 misspelled words in haste confirming that Mr. Harlow lacks capacity to manage finances, no metaphor, no hedge, and below it Keller's digital signature under the name Ace Healthcare Consulting. Claire flagged it, annotated timestamps IP origin, and told me not to discuss it outside privileged channels. "This isn't circumstantial," she said. "It's directive evidence." The next morning, Keller tried to wriggle out, sending a letter citing patient confidentiality. Claire had anticipated it. By that afternoon, she'd filed a formal rebuttal. The transaction was not medical treatment, but paid consultancy outside the scope of HIPAA. She attached proof of payment and the entire email thread. By evening, the court portal lit up with a heavy transfer Keller's files. I opened them. Inside was a draft report, tick-box assessments of cognitive decline written like placeholders waiting to be turned into truth. Top corner label Draft 2. Olivia notes. Every box checked. Every phrase soft, ambiguous, deadly. Metadata showed Keller as the last editor, the file saved from an Arlington device the same night Ben was caught on Harold's video destroying drives. Claire called on video. Her eyes were bright but steady. "This is the axis," she said. "Not Ben hiring Keller." Olivia did. She spoke slowly, letting each word settle into place. I leaned back, staring at the warm wooden ceiling. The map unrolled in my mind, creases flattening one by one. If Olivia directed Keller, then the fraud wasn't a desperate scramble from a drowning debtor. It was orchestration timed, funded, and written. Then came the fallout. Ben's lawyer sent a 1-paragraph statement disavowing any link to Keller. Olivia stayed silent save for a single letter claiming everything she'd done was for my best interest. Claire gave a thin, almost sympathetic smile. "When a marriage starts sinking," she said, "the first lesson is how to throw something overboard and call it by your spouse's name." I thought of Ethan, of the quiet courage it took to press record while the adults rewrote reality. That night, I printed everything: bank statements, email chains, Harold's video, Charlie's debt confirmation. 4 pieces on the table. In the center, a blank space labeled motive. I added 3 words beneath means: executor, director. The pen stopped on director. I exhaled, but it didn't ease. I didn't hate Olivia. Anger was too small a word. What I saw instead was a path someone had chosen and refused to step off, even as the ground began to crumble beneath it. The next morning, the court scheduled a short evidentiary meeting. Small room, half-drawn blinds, Texas sunlight spilling across the oak table like honey. Ben sat opposite, fingers, interlocked, eyes shadowed. Olivia arrived half a minute late, hair pulled back, no makeup, gaze fixed on the table. When Claire opened the binder, first 3 pages, the $20,000 transfer, the confirming email, and the draft report, with metadata, the air folded in on itself. Ben's lawyer broke first, asking for a recess. Claire didn't object. Through the frosted glass, I watched them in the hallway. Ben spoke quickly, hands opening and closing. Olivia stood still, barely moved, just one small shake of her head. They returned. Ben's lawyer announced his client had no connection to Keller. Olivia offered nothing. Claire kept her tone neutral, simply noting for the record that both parties had reviewed the evidence. She stated our intent to pursue full message logs from Keller and Olivia's phones. I gave a small nod, thanked the clerk for keeping us on time. Driving back, Claire said their fracture was inevitable, but we shouldn't count on it. Stay on principle, she said. Follow the money. Follow the process. Truth lives in the ledger, not in emotion. I agreed. Anger is a poor driver on a road built of evidence. By dusk, Lake Travis was glass again. I sat by the window, opened the first message in the thread. 4 words. Olivia to Keller. Need capacity confirmation. Not a question. A command. I closed the laptop, looked across the lake where a single house light flicked on. Everything was aligning, columns, numbers, intentions, finally straight. I poured hot tea, the sound steady as breath. Tomorrow, Claire would file the supplemental motion for mobile data extraction. I knew from here on the battle in court wasn't just between father and son. It was dividing a house clean down the middle, and truth, I suspected, was already rehearsing its lines for the silence to come. I set the cup down, let the heat reach my fingertips, and wrote 2 words in the margin of a new page. The director. Morning broke cold over the marble steps of the Travis County Courthouse. I arrived 15 minutes early. Claire was already waiting at the top of the stairs, a slim black case in her hand, 6 months of my life compressed into evidence. The air outside smelled of coffee and cigarette smoke. Local reporters clustered in the lobby, cameras poised like unblinking eyes. When I passed through, the metal detector shutters snapped in unison. I didn't flinch, didn't smile. Across the aisle, Ben sat beside his attorney. Olivia's seat was empty. Ethan was in the back row, his head lowered, one small hand clutching the strap of his backpack. Court convened at 9 sharp. Judge Raymond Ellison, an old colleague from 20 years ago, looked up through steel-rimmed glasses, his voice steady as a pendulum. The prosecutor confirmed that a civil fraud case was pending financial review. Today's hearing would decide only the validity of the guardianship petition and the claim of mental incompetence. Claire began with the precision of a scalpel. She presented Harold's video, Ben in the rain pulling cords, killing evidence. The courtroom fell silent as the monitor flickered to life. When the green light on the server blinked out, the only sound left was the slow turn of the ceiling fan. Then came the audio file Ethan recorded. Claire played the exact line, Ben's voice: "If he dies or gets ruled incompetent, we're in the clear." I heard my own breath calm and even while Ben's lawyer scribbled furiously. Ben didn't look at me. He stared out the window, jaw locked. When the clip ended, Claire moved to the bank records, the $20,000 transfer from Olivia to Ace Healthcare Consulting, memo consulting fee. Her tone never rose yet, every word carried. Finally, she submitted the verified emails proving Olivia had directed Keller to fabricate the competency report. Each document passed through the clerk's hands like another brick laid into the foundation of truth. The judge turned to Ben. Response, his lawyer stood his voice taut. He claimed Ben had no knowledge of Keller's involvement, that the actions in question were beyond his client's scope. He tried to drag Olivia back into the center as a shield. Judge Ellison cut him off. "That will be for the investigative committee," he said. Then his gaze found me. "Mr. Harlow, anything you'd like to say before we proceed?" I rose both hands on the rail in front of me. "I didn't come here to win," I said. "I came to prove that what's right doesn't age." The court reporter's fingers paused just long enough to look at me before resuming their quiet rhythm. I turned toward Ethan. He looked up for the first time. In that small glance, I knew not everything I'd lost was gone. Claire moved to her final submission. She requested permission to enter a new exhibit, the assignment of debt between Reeves Capital and Harlow Trust, LLC. The judge nodded. The back door opened. Charlie Reeves walked in, envelope in hand, red wax seal catching the fluorescent light. He crossed the aisle, handed it to Claire. She broke the seal and placed the certified transfer on the table. No one spoke. Ben stared at the paper as if it were an artifact from another life. Claire read aloud all rights, title, and claims to the $2.8 million loan have been legally assigned to Harlow Trust, LLC, represented by Edward Harlow. Ben's eyes met mine for half a second, then dropped. His knuckles whitened around each other. Judge Ellison asked purpose of this submission, Claire answered evenly. To demonstrate that Mr. Harlow retains full financial competence. A man declared incapacitated cannot execute a commercial acquisition, let alone become the lawful creditor of the very party petitioning to declare him incompetent. Her words sliced clean through the air. Ben swallowed, but no sound came. The judge sat still for several seconds, fingers drumming lightly on the gavel, as if measuring the weight of what had been said. Then he turned to me, eyes sad but firm. "Anything further, Mr. Harlow?" I shook my head. "I'm not destroying my son," I said softly. "I'm showing him the balance sheet never lies." No tremor in my voice. No defense, just arithmetic spoken aloud. In the back, reporters leaned forward, pens racing. A few camera flashes burst bright and soundless. Claire didn't look up. Her hands rested neatly before her, the calm of someone who'd just completed surgery. Ben's lawyer sank into his seat, avoiding the bench's gaze. Ethan unfolded his hands, resting them on his knees, small, still steady. Judge Ellison rose. The court recognizes the legal standing of Harlow Trust, LLC, and affirms Mr. Edward Harlow's full financial and civil capacity, he declared. The petition for guardianship is dismissed. An inquiry will be opened into the falsified power of attorney and possible financial fraud. 3 strikes of the gavel. Clean. Final. For a moment the room emptied of sound. I sat inhaling the polish of oak benches and old air. Claire turned, gave a brief nod, a half smile ghosting across her face. Across the aisle, Ben bowed his head. No one touched him. No one touched me. We sat at opposite ends of the same story, where justice isn't the victor, just the reminder of what was forgotten. The judge stepped down. Chairs scraped. Reporters flooded out to chase the story. I gathered the files, folded them into the case. Ethan approached quietly. He didn't speak. He just touched my hand, light sure. It was enough to say that what needed to break had broken, and what was meant to remain had survived. Claire suggested we exit through the side corridor to avoid the cameras. We walked down the long hallway, sunlight cutting through glass, merging our shadows on the floor. And in that light, I heard Maggie's voice, her old lesson, when she first taught me how to balance a ledger. Every number wants to return to its rightful place. I stepped outside. The Texas heat rose from the stone steps. For the first time in a long while, I felt everything had finally gone back where it belonged. Not perfect, not whole, but right. Across the street, car horns blared. Wind caught the flags before the courthouse, their fabric snapping like late applause. I looked toward the city, still moving, still alive, then back at the wooden doors closing behind me. I knew this wasn't an ending. It was the first moment in years that the scale had stopped trembling. I walked down the marble steps, my shadow blending into the stream of strangers passing by, leaving behind the echo of a gavel that would keep sounding in memory, a quiet reminder that truth, no matter how late, always finds its way back. February 2025 settled over Austin in a haze of damp mornings and low clouds. On the front page of the Travis Herald, the headline was small, but it carried weight. Dr. Stephen Keller arrested for medical fraud, accused of accepting bribes for false testimony. His booking photo sat below a man, hollowed-out eyes vacant, as if stripped of the very language he once used to survive. Beneath that, another line. Ben Harlow sentenced to 3 years for financial fraud and document forgery. Olivia Harlow received 18 months of probation and 2,000 hours of community service at the Cedar Grove Center, where volunteers cook cheap meals for the elderly. I folded the paper, set it aside. The smell of drip coffee filled the small kitchen. Ethan sat across from me, still in his high school jacket, hair ruffled by the morning wind. He asked what would happen to them now. I told him the court would set things right again, that people who break the rules have to learn to fix what they broke, and that our job was to live each day without bowing our heads. He nodded, his 16-year-old eyes clear as he looked out toward the lake where fog turned the surface into a sheet of soft silver. Claire arrived before noon, a stack of papers under her arm, the temporary guardianship order for Ethan. Just a formality, she said, to make sure his education and finances stay protected until he turns 18. I signed where she pointed. My pen strokes were steady, round the same way I'd signed his birth certificate years ago. When she left, the sun had warmed, spreading gold ripples across the lake. The house began to breathe again in the days that followed. I cleared the office, made space for a small study desk beside mine. Each evening after dinner, Ethan and I sat at the old wooden table and opened my first company ledger. I showed him how to read each column, how to find the negatives, the positives, how to tell which lines held money and which held promises. He copied numbers with a pencil, tapping his rhythm against the page, whispering the sums under his breath. Numbers never lie, I told him, but people do. He looked up. Then how do you know who's telling the truth? I smiled. You check the math, son. Truth shows itself when you balance the books. That night, the sky was moonless. I sat on the porch listening to the water brush against the dock's posts. Ethan played guitar in the living room, the chords clumsy but sincere. My thoughts drifted to Ben, to the way he looked walking out of the courtroom, older by years, in the space of an afternoon. I remembered his small hand gripping my wrist when we used to cross the street. Time had taken much, but not everything. Between two men sharing the same bloodline, only numbers remained, and what we chose to make of them. A week later, I had received the visitation permit. The prison lay south of San Antonio, steel fences humming in the wind like the strings of a muted instrument. 3 security checks, 1 signature, and I stepped into the visitation room. Ben was already there, slouched in orange shoulders smaller than I remembered. When he saw me, he stood. His eyes carried a flicker of shame, fatigue, something wordless. We sat across from each other. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the guard's boots echoing down the corridor. He spoke first, voice rough, as if rehearsed through too many sleepless nights. "I just wanted to keep the legacy," he said. I studied him for a moment, then replied, "You lost it when you forgot it was built on trust." His hands tightened into fists, knuckles whitening against the metal table. I didn't scold. I didn't forgive. I only said, "All that's left to do is start again with empty hands the way I once did." He looked up, eyes wet, asked if I believed he could fix it. "Every number finds its balance," I said. "The question is whether you're willing to walk to it." We sat in silence after that. I told him about Ethan, how he was learning to read ledgers, how his questions cut straight to truth. Ben listened, gaze distant. When the buzzer sounded, he rose, voice barely audible. "Thanks for coming." I nodded. He walked away through the steel door. The lock's metallic click sounded like the spine of a book closing. On the drive back, I stopped at a gas station off Highway 281. Afternoon light spilled across dry fields, lavender bending in the wind. I poured a cup of coffee, sat in the truck with the window down. Ben's face lingered in my mind, but the anger was gone. Only a quiet sadness remained, like a lake gone still after wind. When I returned home, Ethan was watering the plants on the porch. He looked up and smiled. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a small notebook, and placed it on the wooden table. Inside were the first notes I'd written for him, guidelines for managing the Maggie Foundation. Tomorrow, I told him, we'll go to the bank. My father once said, "Whoever holds the ledger must keep his heart aligned with the numbers inside." Ethan nodded, eyes bright calm. Night settled. We ate soup, the radio whispering news of Keller's sentencing. He'd pled guilty, agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced term. I switched the radio off. The quiet lingered. Ethan asked, "So, is it over now?" I said. "Justice isn't an ending. It's a midpoint, the place where you stop to see how far off course you've gone." Outside, the wind carried the scent of cold water from the lake. I stepped onto the porch, watching my shadow stretch across the planks. Through the window, warm light spilled over. Ethan bent over his notes, Maggie's patience in his posture, my quiet stubbornness in his focus. I knew I was old, but there was still work to do. I returned to the desk, opened the ledger, and added one last line, a note on the charity's balance. Then I closed it gently. Everything for now was in balance, and somewhere within that balance, I heard the slow rhythm of lake water against the shore, a quiet assurance that justice, though late, had reached everyone it needed to. Autumn 2025. The wind over Lake Travis carried the cool scent of pine and damp wood. I drove Ethan down to Austin early, a wooden crate in the trunk, holding the first donation plaque from the Maggie Harlow Foundation for Financial Integrity, a grant to fund senior lunches at the Cedar Grove Community Center. The boy sat quietly watching the lake through the window, sometimes tilting his notebook to scribble a few words. It was a new habit, born from our evenings balancing the ledgers side by side. Cedar Grove buzzed with a kind of peaceful energy, the clang of ladles against pots, wheels squeaking across tile, the smell of chicken soup and cornbread drifting through the air. I handed the crate to the manager, read the foundation's name aloud for the receipt, and felt the calm satisfaction of reconciling the day's final line. Then from the kitchen doorway, a woman in a green apron emerged, arms full of trays, head lowered. Olivia. She froze for half a heartbeat when she saw me, then kept walking, set the trays down, and wiped her hands on the apron without lifting her gaze. I stepped closer, stopping at the end of a long table. She spoke softly, saying she was assigned to the serving line today and that I should take the other route out. I nodded, but didn't move. I told her that money can be repaid, but some losses can't be balanced in currency. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, shoulders trembling. I said, "You didn't steal money. You stole a father." No one turned around. Yet somewhere behind me, the sound of a spoon on a plate faltered for a second. She kept her eyes on the table. Her voice came low, steady, but broken. She said she had driven to Lake Travis twice, stopped at the gate, then turned back. That every tray she washed was another count of mistakes that couldn't be undone. I didn't comfort her. I didn't condemn her. I just said, "You can start over, but not from where you stand." She nodded once, quietly asked to return to the kitchen. When the door swung shut behind her, it sounded like a page folding cleanly in an old ledger. Outside, I placed the signed receipt on the dashboard. Ethan opened the car door for me and looked at the paper in my hand. "Does it make you sad?" he asked. I shook my head. "No. Today we corrected the balance sheet." He leaned back, smiled faintly, understanding that some equations are solved not by numbers, but by patience. We didn't drive home right away. I took a detour to a small woodworking shop on the outskirts to pick up the plaque I'd ordered that summer. The craftsman brought out a slab of polished oak, the engraving deep and sharp. "The Maggie Harlow Foundation for those who lost trust." I brushed my hand across the surface. It felt warm, solid, like a promise spoken at the right time. The man asked where I planned to hang it. "At the porch by the lake," I said, "where the wind likes to sing in the mornings." By sunset, the lake shimmered like honey. Ethan rolled up his sleeves, helped me drill and level the board. I checked the line twice. The plumb string hung still, straight as a thread stitching two torn edges together. When the last screw turned tight, we stepped back. The wind swept in from the water. The sign trembled once, then stood firm, letters glowing in the amber light. I whispered, "For those who lost trust, not because they were weak, but because they believed the wrong people." Ethan jogged down to the rocks, skipping flat stones across the surface. The ripples spread, overlapped, and disappeared. I sat on the steps, called him over, opened my small notebook, the one with the corner folded down, and showed him the final line I'd added last night. "Expense entry, first grant date, recipient signature." He read slowly, then asked, "Is that enough for people to trust a foundation?" I said, "Enough to begin. The rest comes one right act at a time until there's nothing left in the book that needs correction." Dusk deepened. I switched on the porch light. It washed over the oak sign, turning the grain into a kind of window. Memories surfaced without demand, Maggie leaning on my shoulder that first night by the lake, the smell of her apple pie in the air. Ben at 5 chasing a paper boat, laughing as the wind splashed water into his face. Olivia on her wedding day gripping Maggie's hands, promising to keep the family like a beautiful secret. They passed through gently like end-of-month numbers, settling into place. No rush, no excuses. Ethan sat beside me asking when we'd launch the free financial mentoring program for local seniors. "By the end of the month," I said. "Once the first class hits 10 people." He nodded, said he'd design a simple flyer with our number and hours. I told him to add one small line at the bottom. "Numbers never lie, let them be your friend." He smiled, wrote it down. I walked to the edge of the dock. The lake mirrored the sky, a deep blue canvas scattered with the first bright stars, like ink dots on clean paper. I thought of Ben in the prison yard, of Olivia's community hours, of Keller facing the truth he'd once sold. I didn't wish them suffering, only remembrance. Justice doesn't demand you kneel, I thought. It just asks you to stand where you belong. The wind rose softly. When I turned back, Ethan had switched on the radio. Faint country music mingled with the hum of crickets. I held my cup of tea, eyes resting on the sign one more time. "The Maggie Harlow Foundation for those who lost trust." My voice came quietly in my mind, steady as a closing entry in a ledger. Justice isn't revenge. It's balance. And tonight, the books are even. I stepped inside, set my cup down, and opened the recording app on my phone. It was time to finish the voiceover Ethan had been asking me to post our first story for the channel about family integrity and the quiet math of forgiveness. I spoke slowly, my voice low and calm. Every family carries invisible numbers, lines that measure how we treat one another. Those lines can tilt or straighten depending on what we choose to give back. If you believe fairness doesn't need noise to echo, share this story. Like, subscribe, and help spread it so those lost in their own columns of mistakes can still find a way home. When I finished, Ethan sat across from me, waiting for me to hit save. He asked, "So, is that the end?" I smiled. Every good story ends where someone else can begin. He nodded, closed his notebook, and stepped outside to turn off the porch light. The darkness softened. The new sign still glowed faintly, its letters deep enough to outlast weather and time. I went to my room, set the phone on the table, and wrote 2 short lines in my ledger: date, receipt number, remaining balance. Outside, the lake lapped gently against the shore, a familiar knock from an old friend. I exhaled slowly, feeling the house fold around me, the way it always had. Thank you for listening. That's the end of my story. If this story moved you, hit like, share, and subscribe to join me on the journeys ahead, stories about family justice and forgiveness. Every click helps these stories reach someone who needs to remember that truth, no matter how late, always finds its way back.